Eve Lorgen has been working as a counseling psychologist for over 3 decades. She's interviewed hundreds of individuals that have spoken about their abduction events. She has also spoken to people that have been part of secret space programs, super soldiers, and she's with us today on Exopolitics Today to talk about her research and her 2 books, The Alien Love Bite and The Dark Side of Cupid.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Well, welcome, Eve, to Exopolitics Today. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you.
I know you've been working in this field for a long time. I got involved in 2001, and I think at some point, a few years after that, I came across some of your work. And so I'm glad that we finally get a chance to talk. So why don't we begin by how you got interested in this field? I know you worked in the biotech industry for 7 years. So how did you make that transition from working in the biotech industry into counseling and psychology?
Good question. I worked as a biochemist for about 7 years, and I just became a little bit disenchanted with the work and also the exposure to toxins. I actually got poisoned on a job early in my career, and since then I really didn't want to stay in the career if I wanted to have children. So I transitioned actually from that to Oriental medicine and then into counseling psychology, because that was what I really wanted to do. And really the motivating factor was because I knew I already had alien UFO kinds of experiences. I wanted to learn more and then help others to explore their traumas, because really at the time this was not even considered reality with the clinicians and psychologists, which is still true today with a lot of them. So that's what really motivated me. So I did get a degree in counseling psychology with emphasis on relationships and family systems. And so from there, I actually just did research and counseling psychology, started a support group for people who've had what they think is alien visitations or Milabs or anomalous things related to the phenomena. And so from there, I really learned a lot about what was going on by just meeting face to face with people in person and working with them over time and becoming friends. And so that really kind of launched the research, as well as my correspondence with the late Barbara Bartholic, who was the hypnotherapist who worked for a lot of the cases in Dr. Carla Turner's work and her books. Specifically the Masquerade of Angels book, which was more of a biographical look at the abduction scenarios and life of Ted Rice, who was one of the abductee clients of Carla Turner. And so it was Barbara Bartholic who did a lot of the regressions, not just on Ted, but on many abductees. It's just that her work didn't really make a lot of, exposure in the community at the time. And actually, I saw Dr. Carla Turner in 1995, believe it or not, in San Diego, when she did one of her last lectures. And from the things that she shared, and this was after her books had come out, all 3 of them, that they were very similar to some of the things that we were finding out in our private support groups and our conversations with Barbara Bartholic. But they weren't really being discussed openly in a lot of the circles of, quote, ufology and the abduction and the MUFON circles and that kind of thing, because it kind of struck a negative nerve for a lot of people, because it suggested a malevolent presence of aliens and what they were doing. And that didn't really bode well for people who wanted to take a positive spiritual perspective of the ETs. And so I think that was one of the reasons why Carla Turner was she was very controversial in her work. But what I learned from her work and from the people I worked with, it was that, our relationships were being manipulated. So we were having experiences, sometimes joint experiences with groups of people, where there was a number of things going on, not only with aliens, but with humans acting in a capacity of military, medical, government kind of stuff. And so within those experiences, we discovered it was like 4 people in the group after we really launched the group, and it was after Carla Turner died in 1996, it was almost as if within the first year or so of the group, there was at least 4 or 5 of us having these, what we felt were alien engineered love obsessions, where we were being put together with other abductee partners in these other environments within these abduction visitation scenarios that often were only remembered as dreams. But sometimes the very lucid ones would remember much more detail and know that there was a physical component to this. So it really led to the discovery that some people are more lucid than others in their experiences and what they remember, and that there really is a physical component to a lot of it. But on the other hand, there's also what we call an astral abduction, or a consciousness transfer kind of experience going on, where people can be influenced, even their physical health, from a different kind of abduction. So that launched doing many more case studies of people who wanted to tell me their stories. And that actually was kind of hard, because it's a very deeply personal thing that is kind of embarrassing, because you're talking about your love life, a love obsession, the sexual kind of things, and what's going on in these abductions or visitations. So many of the people, let's say they would be married to one partner, but they're being bonded to somebody else during their experiences. And they can't really help what's happening, a lot of them. So it comes to a lot of people just not wanting to talk about it. It's just too personal. So being able to even get 20 case studies in the first book, along with discussions of others, was a pretty big accomplishment, even though I'm patting myself on the back here. But one of the major things that we discovered early on was what we're calling the alien interference factor. But it was just like spiritual warfare, or as if some force or group or entities did not want this truth to come forward. They didn't want us to talk and share about certain things. And this demonstrated itself early on in the support group era, when, like before a support group, for example, they shut off my phone for a day and a half. And, there would be problems with internet, problems with phone. Sometimes the people would get in a big fight with their spouse beforehand, and it would sabotage them from coming to the group, or they'd get suddenly sick right when they came up to the door, or they'd be followed by helicopters on the way home. So all kinds of weird things that suggest, somebody is, watching. They don't want us to talk about this, or they want to just display some kind of play that suggests that someone's watching and they don't like what we're doing.
But you had some personal experiences, if I understood you correctly, before you began the counseling psychology. Are these like childhood experiences?
Yes.
So you want to kind of say what happened to you that is relevant to this?
Well, I wished that I could have remembered more and that was one of the things that bothered me, and one of the reasons why I got involved, not just in the counseling psychology, but the hypnotherapy, and then deep lucid dreaming practices to access memories in a lucid dream state. So I was really, motivated. I'm going to get to the truth of this. But I did have experiences early in childhood that I later realized there was many more experiences than I had thought. But I understood it in a different worldview, because I really didn't know what it was like as a 4-year-old and as 11-year-old, and through my teenage years, and even before that. I kind of wanted to have the view, and it was led to believe that there were these positive extraterrestrials who were our friends and taking us, and I really wanted to kind of believe that. But the trauma and all this incongruent kinds of scary amnesia seemed to suggest that there was more going on than some kind of benevolent experience. So maybe that's what created the amnesia, was the trauma of it all. So I didn't remember as much until really I started doing some hypnotic regressions with others, and myself having had them. So I did learn that, yes, I've had experiences in classic grays and some of the others, and more of a Milab thing. So mine was mixed in with some of the Milab kinds of experiences. So really, when Carla Turner came out with her information, and after talking with Barbara Bartholic, it became much more clear the depth of the involvement of the kinds of experiences that I had had. So, yeah.
Did you ever get to work with Dr. John Mack? Because I know he was also involved in the field in the 1990s.
I didn't get to work with him personally. I was going to get a regression with Barbara Bartholic, but I had an abduction right before that and then was threatened not to go, and I got sick, so I couldn't travel. So I did the best I could with my own, processes of trauma recovery with what I learned in my own clinical practice. And I seem to get a lot through the practice of lucid dreaming. And also, I later had done a lot of Buddhist meditation retreats and silent retreats, and then dream yoga with Buddhist meditation to help bring clarity to what was going on. But I believe that in hindsight now, what brings greater clarity depends on how ready you are on many levels of being to really address the truth with respect to trauma. And there's spiritual components that need to be addressed, which I learned later was related to some of these groups, especially in Milabs, where they might have a connection with MK Ultra or ritual abuse components. So there's a spiritual component of control and manipulation of the soul and the mind that we have to deal with prayers and some kind of spiritual practice to get rid of that influence. And a lot of those influences, which really contribute to how clear we are in understanding our experience, have to do with how well we can recover from the trauma on really just a human psychology level, and then the spiritual level on top of it. So the more clear we can be with the trauma recovery and the integration of body, mind, soul, spirit, then the greater clarity we will get on what's happening with us and really what is the identity or quality of beings that we're interacting with. Which actually, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, you mentioned that you were going to have a regression session with Barbara Bartolic and you were threatened. So
Yes.
What happened?
Well, I had scheduled a plane trip to see her in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And then I think it was the night or 2 nights before I would leave and, to go to the airport. And it was like a dream abduction. I actually wrote about it in my book. It was kind of disguised as another person, but what had happened, it was very unusual, but I think this is classic, that sometimes it's as if they're not physically taking us, but how they affect us will have a physical effect. So how I remembered it was being in, like, suddenly becoming semi-lucid in a dream, like a lucid dream, and being in front of a desk of a military man who was asking me all kinds of questions, which was really weird. And I think he wanted to know what I remembered about my experiences. And then he wanted to know what I believed about God, which was a really unusual question. And I don't know, it could be just the dream symbology that comes through my memory, but he didn't like my answer about what I told him. And so he made me eat something that was like a piece of paper that had like a drug on it that was like a yellowish color. And then after he forced me to eat this thing, it caused me to kind of go into a trance and get like really dizzy, as if I was losing consciousness even in the dream, like being put to sleep. And then I remember hearing voices, like a hypnotic suggestion being placed in my consciousness during the dream that you will, what did they say? They said, you will not go to see Barbara Bartholic. You will go along with it, like go along with the program of what was going on, which means the love bite, because that's why I was going to go see her, because I wanted to get behind this thing, right? Find out what was really happening. But they told me, no, you will just go along with it. Everything's going to be okay. And if you don't, we're going to kill you and your family. So when I woke up, I had like a really sore throat. I was really sick, and I couldn't travel. And I was, alarmed by that because, Barbara had told me that sometimes things do happen. And, she's experienced that a long time in her research with different people. So I wasn't able to get to the deeper root of what happened, especially in the quote, how they set me up with another partner. But I came to understand this more later as I developed more awareness and calmness in my own life. And so I did learn more, but it was just unsettling that that they do this and that they did threaten me and made me sick, and then they were actually giving me post-op hypnotic suggestions to go along with it, but I was like resisting. And other things had happened over the years where they kept trying to interfere to It's like, let's just say their military know. This is my assessment. The military know, or some government military human groups know who is being abducted, and they want to follow and trace those people. And they want to keep a lid on certain aspects of their experiences or their abductions or the involvement with humans. So they want to keep that under security, right? So that they try to interfere so that that information doesn't get out in the public or in hypnotic regressions. So they want to keep a lid on a lot of this material. And I think that's what happened to me. They didn't want me to know the depth of involvement that the military and the government and secret human groups already know. So they're already following a lot of abductee lines. And my feeling is that they are actually manipulating many of them. And this has been discussed actually by Melinda Leslie, for example. She made that quite clear in her experiences where they were abducted and interrogated. So that's nothing new in the abduction literature. But that's what I discovered along the way. And so really what became important to me as a priority was trauma recovery and spiritual integrity, to remove those malevolent influences which wanted to keep me from remembering my true nature and my true spiritual nature. So that kind of led me on more of a path of, that's why I started doing Buddhist meditation retreats. And then I later did like deliverance and a lot of prayer with the power of Jesus Christ. And that was very helpful. And also understanding how to recover from complex trauma, which is very relevant for people who've had alien abductions and what I called Milabs, but now we're just calling it, the secret space program is a common term. But before that, really, even before the super soldier term was used, which I came up with in many ways, or made more available in the literature, we called it the Montauk Boys way back when. I interviewed someone who was in the Montauk Project who Preston Nichols brought out in a public testimony in 1998. And so I found out much more about those projects through the people who came forward. And then it kind of progressed into people who remembered having military super soldier or ultimate warrior experiences where there are prototypes in these weird secret projects involving alien technology. So a lot of these things just evolved over time in terms of the terminology they use and what we've discovered with the different alphabet soup agencies involved with these secret projects and the, quote, alien beings or ETs involved in some of these collusion kind of projects, which, begs the question, what did Eisenhower and that early treaty, what did they really know about the groups of people being taken and what progressed from that point forward,
So you want to tell us about the different types of aliens that you found in your therapy sessions or through your own personal experiences that were involved in these abduction events? I mean, starting with the Greys, who most people are familiar with in some capacity.
Yeah, definitely Greys, small Greys, sometimes the brown ones. I have one in my experience that had, it was one of the really smaller ones, but that had legs that went backward like an insect, So that was a weird type that took a pregnancy. And then the insectoids, the reptilians, different kinds of reptilians, tall grays. And I remember seeing a tall black gray, which was unusual. And then the Nordic types and the very tall, thin, probably humanoid looking, but I didn't see the faces. So I think those are the ones mostly that I've seen, but I've heard others being reported, like the spider beings. And then the primordial man. And there was actually an image before we started the interview of a particular type of being that has come up, not in very many experiences, but has come up in the research of Italian researcher Dr. Corrado Malanga, who worked with alien abduction and UFO research for probably 30 years at least, and did a lot of regressions. And he did research where basically they had to find out who we are as humans with our triad of consciousness, mind, spirit, soul. And then once we come to an understanding of that and an integrated wholeness, then we can understand the aliens basically, and the hierarchy of aliens involved in the different forms and appearances they're taking. So one of the highest on the hierarchy was this image called the primordial man. And he also had a name for it, Adam Kadmon, based on his scientific way of observing this. But he did put an image up earlier. But what was interesting is I didn't hear about this till years later, that there was a man named, oh God, what is his name? I can't remember his name, but he's someone who had an experience with him in the 80s and also claimed to have an experience with Enki himself. Gosh, I wish I could remember his name, but there was someone else. That's the primordial man, this image here. So it's like a very tall humanoid male figure that has like extremely bright shining eyes, like the light just comes out of his eyes, and maybe his hands too. So this was the one that supposedly was like this head honcho of all the different aliens, who was responsible for actually recycling the souls that he had laid claim over through the different people whose souls are aligned with him. So in the therapeutic work of Dr. Corrado Malanga, which was very effective, by the way, I added that to my work. Basically, it's how to remove the alien interference and parasitic hijacking that they may do between the mind and the spirit, or the soul and the spirit, so that they use our eternal spirit as a battery, and then they insert their own consciousness that is not of the eternal spirit nature, but it's like a consciousness that has a history and, intelligence and a willpower. So they use the battery of our spirit to basically empower them to carry out their identity and their agenda through us as kind of like hosts or containers for their consciousness. So that's what I learned. And once Malanga made it clear, at least from a conceptual level of understanding this scientifically, there was a methodology to, if we can connect very strongly and clearly with our eternal spirit, which is, I think a lot of hypnotherapists aim to do this without alien interference, then we're able to remove their hacking into our consciousness and whatever manipulations or deceptions they're doing, including false memories. Then we can use our eternal spirit power to basically burn them off or remove them altogether, so that we no longer become visible in their spectrum. We become invisible to them. So there's a whole process of how that takes place with many abductees that he worked with and that I worked with, where we discovered all kinds of things by using this method. So
I just wanted to kind of like get an idea of this kind of this different assortment of extraterrestrials involved in the abduction phenomenon that you're familiar with, and you mentioned a few of them already. So I just wanted to get a sense. Some people talk about a hierarchy, and they say, for example, that the Draco reptilians are like at the apex of this kind of abduction hierarchy. So yeah, do you want to speak to that? Are the Draco reptilians at the kind of peak in terms of controlling this abduction phenomenon from the perspective of the extraterrestrials?
Yeah, in fact, the Dracos are definitely higher on the hierarchy. You don't really hear about as many as their encounters, but ahead of the Draco, or in Malanga's hierarchy, he had, it was like the alien greys, and then like the different kind of reptilians, and the Nordic cyborgs, and the reptilians and insectoids. He put insectoids above the reptilians and above the insectoids, like Dracos. And then there was one that he called the Horus Ra figure, which is kind of like a bird-like figure or face, like with a bird-like beaky nose, and then big eyes that look kind of like gray, with kind of like a cowl, a cape, and then these funny little things that are on their shoulders that look like, I don't know, protruding bones or something, maybe where there might have been wings, or a winged type of creature. And sometimes they're referred to as winged serpents as well. So I would think that the Dracos are very similar to that, like a winged creature, basically. So, but people can perceive these in different ways. But the what do you call it? The primordial man was actually on top of all those beings. And he was kind of like a father figure that took almost a religious god kind of, I don't know, demeanor. So
Okay, so
he could seem good and bad all at the same time. Let's put it that way.
okay,
Yeah.
that's interesting. So you have a hierarchy, and the mantids. You mentioned the mantids, the praying mantis, because they often are kind of described in these alien abductions as almost like a senior scientist capacity. Somehow they're above the greys, but they're below the Draco reptilians in the hierarchy, and they're kind of like senior scientists, kind of specializing with difficult cases. And so so that's kind of consistent with what you found?
Yeah. Although in Malanga's thing, he thought the insectoids were higher than the reptilians, and then the reptilians didn't like that because they always saw themselves as being greater, which is
Okay.
kind of funny. But I've heard things about the insectoids where they. I heard this from Ted Rice, who is the client of Barbara Bartholick. He seemed to think that he understood them as the, what did he call it, caretakers of the children, and he observed things that were quite graphic and negative about those beings in terms of the consumption of humans by a particular type. So I've heard that from Ted Rice, and there's not too many others that I've heard that about the insectoids. But the ones who put together, like the ones that I ended up working more with as I worked in my research, simply because I got more clients who thought they were having a alien orchestrated love obsession or an alien love bite or a dark cupid where they're being interfered with by some alien being. I got more of those cases, and then the beings who were interfering with respect to putting people together with the love obsession kind of thing. So those types of beings were definitely the greys, the insectoids, the reptilians, and the dracos, and mostly those types seeing, or a very high level light being that I would consider a high level fallen angel type. And they're very powerful and very effective what they do. And I think those are the ones responsible for doing what we're calling the false twin flame thing, where they can really do a number on people, but they may only work in the astral realm. They may not be doing direct abductions, and they may not even work with people who are classic, quote, abductee experiencers, but there's still a type of being that can interfere on that level and do that kind of thing to humans. So
Okay. So you also talk about these Nordic cyborgs. There's some of these beings, like one of the images on your website, you have of this orange animatrix. I think you termed it.
oh,
So,
that one. Yeah, right.
yeah. So, I mean, are these positive beings, or are these part of this kind of like consortium of extraterrestrials that are part of this overall abduction phenomenon that brings in these romantic aspects that you were describing?
I've only heard of a few people who've had the orange, I guess the orange beings, and they seem kind of in between. So I can't say what they are. Although in the Ted Rice case, because I worked closely with Barbara Bartholick, and I got a lot of my understanding of, how do they play this game, with all these different shapes and images and types of beings. But in many of the experiences of the cases that she shared with me, even privately, there would be, let's say, one main experiencer who had classic abduction, missing time, but then they may have a number of different beings who are all seem to be cooperating together, sometimes within the same experience. Like in the Ted Rice case, for example, in the Masquerade of Angels, talks about a main abduction event where there was many different beings seen within that one large craft, or where there was like a cloning procedure taking place, as if they were all working together and knew one another and in collusion, with one another, using humans as a type of resource, an experimental farming project.
Okay, so we have this assortment of different extraterrestrial groups. Some are human-looking that are kind of like not quite part of this overall abduction phenomenon. So you wrote the book, The Alien Love Bite, in 2000, which kind of like breaks new ground, because it's not just about people having abduction experiences. You found this agenda to create these kind of romantic relationships, almost like the extraterrestrials are manipulating people to have relationships with, whether it's a twin flame or a soulmate or whatever. So yeah, you want to tell us, how exactly did you discover that?
I discovered it by having one myself, of course. And I almost think in hindsight, this is kind of strange, but in hindsight, I saw it as let's say, a distraction from full awareness. But then in hindsight, in my history or how things came to be, it all turned out for the good because I end up revealing many things and helping others and becoming more aware. So I'm not going to say it was all a malevolent purpose, um, because in hindsight, things worked out to help others in a benevolent way. But before I even had the original quote love bite, which showed itself as a just a major love obsession, that was like, meeting someone and feeling their spirit, and then having telepathic dreaming and awareness and instant remote viewing of them and knowing everything about them, their soul. And it's just like having your souls like fused with one another. But before that took place, I was still corresponding with Barbara Barthwick at the time. This was after Carla Turner died. But when I got my master's degree, and this is, of course, before I had my son, and then I did much hypnotherapy training and self-hypnotherapy, where I would do it for post-hypnotic suggestions before I went to bed. I was practicing lucid dreaming with the Stephen LaBerge work, for example, but I was always able to do this anyway. So I just did that, where I was just like, I'm going to find my memories. I'm going to go back. I'm going to access this in my subconscious mind. And then I got some things that were really scary that I didn't understand at the time, that seemed to open up something that was really, really scary. And it was so scary that it like shut down. And then immediately on the tail end of that beginning awareness process, where I was starting to access deep trauma, then I just started having this love obsession that was just took over my entire awareness and energy, and activated my energy centers and activated my psychic ability even more, and got me into more research with more people who are having experiences. So it led me on a quest and writing the book and learning this happening to other people. So it kind of led me into a different direction. But later in life, I did return to, trying to access what we're calling amnesiac memories from trauma. I'm really getting to understand what can really open this up in a safe way. So in hindsight, I think I was distracted from this, and I learned this would happen in lucid dreams. Let me just give you an example. It's kind of weird. And I learned this more deeply when doing Buddhist meditation retreats. I would go into a lucid dream state. And then as a psychologist, I would know that, okay, in our subconscious mind, from this Jungian perspective, everything in the dreaming is kind of like a reflection of our own consciousness, could be a reflection of ourself or projections of personality qualities. So I would go into the lucid dream and just discover what's there, and then identify what was projected aspects of my own being, and then merge with that. And then once the merging took place and I knew what was more me and what was something that was not so clear as a projection of self that I could identify, then I started noticing watchers in my dream. And they would have a particular quality. Sometimes they would show up as like a widow's peak man, or a dark male figure, or a figure that kind of had this, like the primordial man, but he would be like a love-hate relationship. And so they tended to be like tricksters in the consciousness dreamscape. And then they would also try to activate the sexual kundalini energy to create a distraction, so that I couldn't get more lucid to really assess, who are these watchers in my dreamscape and why are they interfering in my consciousness? So that led to a real, deep dive into consciousness and lucid dreaming, and how we can be more discerning when we see something that is really ourself, or a projection, or a dissociated part, like an alter personality or an alien, or a literally a watcher. So that's how they presented themselves to me. So long story short, as I learned, I started doing more prayer. And at the time I was doing Buddhist meditation practice with different lamas and stuff. So sometimes they would help me in my dreams, and they would become more clear. So the the beings that would come in to help me, they made it so that these watchers weren't there, and they were more clear as teachers, so that I could start seeing past lives and different things like that. So it helped when I cultivated a spiritual practice of benevolence and benevolent intent to bring clarity and reduce the interference of these watchers in consciousness. But they were also taking place within the abduction experience and behind the abduction experience. If that makes sense? Yeah.
Yes, yes. So there's this spiritual warfare component going on with the abduction phenomenon, and that as you become more aware of this kind of like overall spiritual framework, the kind of intervention or the influence of, whether you call them watchers, fallen angels, Elohim, that these kind of transcendental beings or primordial beings that you already have talked about, that they're involved, that one needs to get in touch with their inner core or their soul
Yes.
essence or soul matrix to be able to make progress, to understand it, and to, I guess, break free of that control and manipulation. Would that be kind of like the way you understood it and
Yeah.
approached it?
Yeah. And there's many layers and levels to this that I learned later through people who have had ritual abuse and what we're calling the hierarchy system families, that some call, oh, well, Illuminati family bloodlines or satanic ritual abuse, where they had, experiences with certain alien groups and certain, human trafficking and that kind of thing. So I learned that there's a certain spiritual warfare element that must be addressed. And what worked for me ultimately the best was the power of Christ and Jesus Christ to offset those beings and those principalities that were interfering and maybe responsible for the amnesia and the mind control, not only with people who had those experiences that weren't, quote, abductees, but those who were grafted into what I'm calling like Milab projects. And so there really is a connection, in my view, between the spiritual authority that certain human groups, for thousands of years actually, in collusion with other types of what we're calling them aliens or watchers or Elohim or different ones. They work with certain human groups, and then they have authority, spiritual authority, by doing blood oaths. And then they take those ancestral lines and then use them in projects, and then as if they have legal authority over them to use them in their capacity for whatever as assets. So this actually happens in MK Ultra and the ritual abuse families, and I believe many of the Milabs and secret space programs, if we see this in their history. And that's a very uncomfortable topic, I think, to address, because it suggests that there's a malevolent spiritual authority working over those bloodlines and in collusion with human groups on Earth with these off-world or non-human intelligences. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the MILABs or military abductions. I mean, while the military and government agencies tend to play dumb when it comes to the extraterrestrial phenomenon, saying, well, we don't know what's going on and all of that, behind the scenes, they're abducting abductees, which I guess Melinda Leslie calls them re-abductions. So
Yes.
you get someone abducted by a grey or reptilian or whatever extraterrestrial, they return, and then the military comes in and re-abducts them, and so can you take it up from there? What happens to them with that re-abduction?
Oh my goodness. Well, I think one of the first cases that I heard about was Leah Haley Davenport, who wrote about her experiences in the 90s. And some of it, I don't know if in her early experiences she believed there might have been a benevolent connection with, I think it was alien grays, but she was abducted by them. And then there was some kind of crash of a UFO where she was in the craft with aliens who were the ones usually taking her. And then the military had intervened in a crash. And then they were basically holding her at gunpoint and then re-abducting her and interrogating her as if these abductees are a national security threat to certain human military groups, which I believe is the case for some groups that maybe they don't, how everything's compartmentalized anyway, but the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. But I believe that there may be some groups that if they don't have enough information on them and they don't already have your name on the list and they know you're an abductee who's being abducted by this particular group, then they're going to hone in on trying to find who you are and what your experiences are and whether or not they consider this a national security threat. And so they can not only re-abduct you, but I've had this happen actually, where they just go directly into a dream hack consciousness. Let's say you go into a dream or a dream state, and then they try to pretend they're like somebody you know, and then they're just faking it because the remote influencers like hacking your dream, and then they'll just like interrogate you, pretending like there's somebody you know, like your family member, and ask you all kinds of questions about certain things that they find troubling because they couldn't get information on it because they didn't have files on that. And then they will try to hack and get information directly out of your mind, by the way, when you're in supposedly a non-lucid state. And then if they can't get enough that way, then they re-abduct you later in a more accessible way. And that actually happened to me one time. And they were concerned about a human-looking group that they didn't know enough about, which surprised me because I didn't even know the extent of my own involvement, to tell you the truth. It surprised me.
I remember there was a book written by Helmut Lammer called Milab, which showed the cover of that. And he put that out. I mean, he was an Austrian researcher, and he put that out. And then very quickly, he disappeared. I mean, he was silenced. Do you know anything about him, what happened in his case?
I'm not sure I know what exactly happened to him, but we were in correspondence for a while, like through post mail as researchers. And I remember that he was deeply concerned about what he had heard about with other cases that he maybe didn't write about in that book, like the transfer of consciousness technology that the aliens were doing. And now it's well known, the Michael Aquino and his whole involvement with the ritual abuse and the children and the involvement with projects, which some super soldiers, SSP people actually have reported on now in more detail. The Daryl James testimony talked about Michael Aquino and seeing him and his experiences and what he really was, what Aquino really was. So I knew that Helmut Lammer knew about this stuff. He knew about, John Alexander and these groups that were trying to actually, this happened to a colleague of mine. And I won't say it happened to me, but certain groups knew who certain abductees were, like in the early days when they would go to these conferences and start talking about their experiences. I know Helmut Lammer knew about this, that they would try to recruit these abductees who were naturally psychic and recruit them into like their own little private remote viewing projects and psychic projects. And that created some problems for some people because there was a malevolent aspect to it where they got psychically attacked if they didn't want to play ball with these groups that were associated with some of these, what we now know as satanic groups involved with the military. But anyway, I think Helmut Lammer knew about that. And he also knew about the transfer of consciousness technology and the black box technology. And it was just very disturbed about basically the human collusion groups involved with aliens and this technology. And that's all I remember is that, he was deeply concerned about really the satanic involvement with some military and human groups that they knew a lot about the aliens, like they were connected.
Can you tell us a little bit about the consciousness transfer technology? I remember reading Alex Collier's book where he talked about the gray aliens using some kind of consciousness technology transfer, that they would take the soul and put it in some sort of black box, and then they would take it off planet as some kind of trade. So is that what you're talking about? What do you know of this consciousness transfer technology?
Well, there's a couple that I've heard described, including Alex's description, but the one that made more of a powerful impact was how Ted Rice in the Masquerade of Angels book by Dr. Carla Turner, where one of his early experiences when he was, I think, 10 years old. And so, when he was a kid, he had a major abduction experience where they did they transferred his soul essence into a clone body that was already pre-prepared. So, but how they did this was through it was like a human looking figure in a white lab coat kind of was really an alien, but they dress up sometimes like humans in doctor coats, but they look like stupid and silly. But I guess in his description, they made him drink a fluorescent green liquid, like a small cup of this fluorescent green liquid. And he's like in some kind of medical dental chair kind of thing, tied up. And then once he drank the fluorescent liquid, it caused him to, black out. I think it caused a vomiting kind of gastrointestinal rejection. And then he remembers basically popping out of his body and observing that this liquid was tied in with how it combined in with the soul essence and the consciousness of the person. And then they transferred that consciousness to a black box. I don't know if they literally put the liquid in there, but the liquid had essence of the soul in it. And so he understood it as a transfer of consciousness into this black box. And he was basically out of body watching the whole thing, where they basically killed the original body by cutting off the head and then transferring the essence of spirit, soul into the black box, and then taking the black box over to a clone body that was stored in a bunch of, kind of like coffins in cold storage, like a bunch of drawers, and, had a body ready made at that same age. And then to activate putting the soul back in the body, they had to do some kind of electrical signal where they placed the black box on the chest shoulder area, like on the side. And then it kind of activated the heart, like when they do give you the EKG thing to get the heart beating. And then it was as if the soul essence was literally transferred back into the clone body. But my idea is that there's something to do with this fluorescent liquid that acts as a medium between the physical body and the soul essence, and can have a quantum transference of energy from a physical solid directly into a vaporous form that can go right into the body through electrical impulse. So that's how he remembered a transfer of consciousness from his regular body into a clone body. And so that was like a hugely traumatic experience that he did remember. And that when he did come back, he got very ill for like 2 months, couldn't go to school for 2 months. And then he ended up getting the same childhood diseases over again at that time. They still had chicken pox and mumps and measles, but he ended up getting those childhood diseases that he had already had, So it shows that second body, wasn't immunized against these diseases. So that's one case of transfer of consciousness. But there's another that is a little more subtle, that still has to do with the black box, but can transfer the consciousness from the black box to something else. And then there's another one. This is what was in Dr. Corrado Malanga's work, and there's a sketch of this on my website somewhere. And it has to do with these cylindrical large containers that can hold the physical body. So there's like a horizontal one, and then there's a vertical one. And one person I know who I've interviewed like 4 times, who has a lot of conscious memory, was put in one of these chambers. And then what they did is they activate some kind of frequency, and then the frequency causes their etheric body, the etheric double, to be just activated, as if it basically just jerks them out of the body. And so it does a frequency, and then it pulls it loosens it out of the body, and then that soul essence goes into like a tube of some sort, and then goes into another body, which may be a clone body or another alien body. And she remembers this happening to her. But Dr. Corrado Malanga had heard this reported several times in his hypnotic regressions, and even got someone to do a sketch of the equipment that they saw when this took place. So there's different ways in which I believe that they can transfer consciousness in a more physical way. And then there's other ways they can do things now that I believe that the Milabs and super soldiers they're starting to report in their experiences. That has to do with, I know it's complex, but if they can split the consciousness through trauma, creating alter personalities that have a specific skill of interest, then they can access that alter personality while you're still in your physical body, asleep in bed, pull them up on a trigger cue code through telepathic triggering, and then pull that astral alter straight out of the body and transfer it into a clone or another reality where they have some kind of usefulness because of that alter's skill as an asset. So there's different ways in which transfer of consciousness can actually take place.
So then, in your research, you have pretty much confirmed that not only can they transfer consciousness from one body to another body or into a black box for later use, but they can also take out a part of a consciousness, like like an extract, and use that so that someone can have an extract of their consciousness moved into a clone, and that clone is used in a secret space program, but they go on living in their normal program. But somehow, because of the soul connection, they might have strange dreams.
Yeah.
Is that, yeah, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, the dreams come in as looped memories. And sometimes I think they could take you out of, quote, time and space. And we know that they've done this in alien abductions for years, where they could take you, use you in their medical, whatever they're doing with you for a period of time, and then come back. Sometimes it's missing time, but sometimes it's like not missing time or before you were even taken. And one of my colleagues had that happen, where he came back 10 minutes earlier before he was taken and had this whole deja vu for 10 minutes. But they took him, they brought him back too early. So, but they can take you back within what seems like a moment of time, but they had been working with you in another dimensional reality for a longer period of time. So I think that's why they can remember being utilized on an op that may take a period of time, but then come back as if they didn't really have much missing time. And it's kind of confusing. But I think that there's an energy loss. I think if they're always utilizing you, your energy and your physical energy could be depleted while that's taking place.
I know on your website you mentioned that some alien abductees are sheep dipped and trained as operatives under mind control for secret government or SSPs or intelligence agencies. So, yeah, you want to elaborate on what's going on there?
Yes, I think. I mean, I've seen this in several cases where before they were taken in these projects, which sometimes they're not aware of it. Let's say the Milab, until, let's say, school age, elementary school, where they're, done these special tests in school, where they'll do this special hearing test at like a regular, public school or a Catholic school. That's a red flag. But then they'll take you in for hearing tests, and then they'll like ask you again and again, like, why do they have to keep retaking you for like a friggin' hearing test? Like they're surprised that you can hear certain tones. And then that seemed to be one of the markers that, my labs would come together and talk about their elementary school, where they had these like secret projects or the gifted student program. And then they might be memory wiped, and they were taken on these like special field trips or trained in a certain way. So that's later, like after. So that's a sign that they're in a Milab program, but it depends on how they test. But what is really, I believe, something that they may not know is a lot of times earlier in their life, 3 years old, 3, 4, 5, 6, or even before, they already had been an abductee by a particular alien group. And then they were primed by that alien for some reason. They may have a quality of usefulness or uniqueness to be used as an asset. The military knows who they are, and they have collusion with that alien group who's already taken them and maybe did something, primed them as a foundation to be used later in a project that's under some kind of military use. So a lot of them already are abductees,
Fascinating. So, with some of these secret space program insiders that have been coming forward, I began working with Randy Kramer in 2014. He was actually the first secret space program witness that I interviewed, but he told me that you actually had interviewed him a few years beforehand. I think he said like 8 years beforehand, something like that. So, yeah. So, what did you do with Randy Kramer? What did you learn from him?
Yeah, well, we corresponded by email and phone for several years before he became public. He really didn't know the full extent of what had happened. And I know that there was an involvement with heavy duty interference and Draco interference in his situation. And he had to get clear on that through a lot of healing modalities. With, really, he had to just basically do whatever he could find to get healing from this malevolent influence of what he felt was Draco, actually, or maybe some others. And then once he was able to do that level of healing, he was able to go deeper and start discovering more memories of the military. But we had worked together with one of Dr. Corrado Malanga's colleagues named Dora Kamanu, where we did I think it was the flash mental simulation method of hypnotherapy. It's a type of process to uncover more of what was going on, to assess the basically what was going on with the mind, spirit, soul, consciousness, to see that if there was an interceptor in consciousness, be able to deal with it so that a greater clarity of memories and coherence between the mind, soul, and spirit in the body could take place, so that greater healing could come forth with less interference from the malevolent ones who did not want him telling his story. So it seemed that there was a lot of interference before he was able to go public with the military aspect. And my sense was that I believe that there's some, I mean, I can't say this is true, but I think there are some military groups who've known what was going on. And then they thought, oh my God, we really don't like what these aliens are doing. We got to do something else to protect humankind. Maybe let's do a special project so that we can have people who are trained in the same ways, but defend against and be able to be resilient to the alien mind control and manipulation. And that might be a type of group that humans wanted to do once they realized that these aliens in the Eisenhower era, whatever, weren't honoring their treaties, and they're actually bad, So I think something like that is going on, where it's just not cut and dry in terms of the different projects that they've created and the different assets they want to be resilient to these forces. So that's my idea.
So, we know that the military was tracking the alien abductions. They know that the aliens were conducting intergenerational genetic experiments. So it makes sense that the military would be doing their own genetic program to create super soldiers. I mean, Randy Kramer, actually, I think he said something about him being genetically altered, kind of like very early on, even during his mother's womb somehow, that some kind of genetic alteration was going on. So, this alteration of genetics, how big a part, or what kind of a role does that play in the covert operations that you've learned about?
Well, I've never seen absolute genetic evidence of this. I suppose there's people who are in projects, the scientists, they would know, like, on a genetic test, they would be able to know, like, what was, alien augmentation or something. But I don't know what that would be like on a 23andMe test or whatever, although there's mention of certain chromosomes being affected. But from how I understand it, they can augment and then create like a looped genetic sequence of a particular alien type. And that if you have a consciousness frequency, let's say of a hosting really of a particular alien consciousness in your body, mind, spirit, like a possession or partial possession, for lack of a better term, then it would activate that gene that was inserted, so that it would be expressed more easily if you had the consciousness embedded in your body, mind, spirit, so that the body genetics could express, and then they would have more qualities of that, quote, alien, or whatever that genetic sequence was for that trait. So that's how I see it, because I don't know how they can add in extra genes. I think they would have to take out some genes and then insert some others, or create a chimera kind of situation, which I think might be more what they're doing. So
what about the new world order, the mind control, mass mind control that's going on? I mean, how is that related to the whole alien abduction phenomenon?
Well, that's something that Phil Schneider, the late Phil Schneider, talked about years ago, that he believed that the alien agenda is the New World Order agenda. But as we see this progressing, I mean, I'm seeing it from my own observation, and it's not going to be a popular opinion, but it seems to me that the more mind controlled, the more traumatized, the less power and sovereignty we have over these technologies and influences that we can call alien, the more we are progressing towards their agenda of control. So it seems that there are certain technologies that are compromising our natural, original, eternal awareness, which Dr. Corrado Malanga sought to, if we can connect more deeply with our eternal, original natural awareness, then we can overcome those influences in our consciousness and in our world from the ones intervening to, they want to live through us. So have us become them to take over and be their agenda, which is a world dominion, using our bodies, quote, containers of consciousness. So that's how I understand it. So, but I like to see what would be the solution if that was true, because I'm always looking for solutions in how we can access our true spiritual authority and power of the eternal realm that we came from, that many actually have memories of, that we can access if we do our trauma recovery and remove those spiritual influences and ancestral curses. Then we can connect more powerfully to that original nature. And then we can have more power over that which wants to influence and control us. But that would take a supernatural kind of ability, in my view, to offset some of this. But in some ways, it's like the old-fashioned, exorcism kind of things. And that's actually what Corrado Malanga and many hypnotherapists have found with some people with respect to the more malevolent, obvious ones like reptilians trying to host people and, be in their body, and the fight that could ensue when you're trying to do a spirit releasement kind of thing. You can see some of that in some people's healing experiences. So I think there is a new order agenda that would be a hijacking of human consciousness using their spirit as a battery to, implement their own agenda. And that's the danger of technology and artificial intelligence as well. So, our spiritual original awareness, which is, the question we need to really ask ourselves is, who are we? If we can come to true self-understanding of our original human awareness from the eternal realms, not the temporal realms, then that will give us all the answers to know what the others are. And so that was the real, success, I think, of how Corrado Malanga actually figured out, oh, okay, now that we know who we are, we can figure out what they are and how they're trying to hijack us. So we just use our spiritual authority and abilities to basically pop off their screen. Basically, we become invisible to them because they are temporal beings that must hijack and parasite what they separated from, which kind of goes back to, well, is that what the fallen angels are? Did they separate from the eternal? And that's why they're doing all this blood sacrifice and having to kill and vampirize, which is really a vampirization process, because they ain't right. From Appalachian, vernacular, there's something ain't right about them. And it's intuitive, actually, to our spirit. So that goes back to original awareness of our spirit. And how can we reconnect with that and make that stronger? So instead of identifying with them, we need to identify with original spirit, original awareness. So it has to do with what we identify with.
Question of abductees versus contactees. Abductees are caught up in this kind of phenomenon that you've described with, this hierarchy of aliens and involving fallen angels as well, that are manipulating, changing, controlling, as opposed to contactees who seem to be in touch with a much more benevolent force of extraterrestrials who tend to be kind of like they keep a hands-off approach. They kind of like take the view that while humanity's having to sort out its own future and destiny, we'll give advice, we'll help, but you need to work it out yourselves before we can appear amongst you. So what do you know about that? And is there a meaningful distinction between abductees and contactees?
Well, I think, contactee in the early 50s had its own signature. But then again, as we learn more about the phenomena, we came to understand, oh, well, how do we know that's not a cover story and a manipulation that's part of this larger, deception, which, we would only know if we could interview those people in the early days. But I have heard of people, and I've had experiences myself with beings that take on different appearances that have a benevolent signature and a benevolent feel. They were more interacted with within a dream or lucid dream. Sometimes they would appear and, be like an angel, like actually helping and giving answers to questions. So I don't think those ones abduct people, but they may appear here and there, and it tends to be spontaneous so that you can't necessarily call on them all the time. So that's how the good ones tend to, contact people. And so abductions, they usually comes with trauma of some sort or mind control. So, and then there's this whole thing about the good cop, bad cop thing that they play. And I've seen this, I talked about this in the Dark Side of Cupid book. So it happened within the framework of a love obsession that was an orchestrated experience with two people where other beings were involved who were kind of playing them like puppets in a big drama myth, where they fell into the archetype of, let's say, Osiris and Isis, or Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And they contacted beings that maybe one person was channeling. And then they told them that, okay, this is your soulmate, this is your twin flame, and you have a special mission together. And you need to fight these wars because, you're powerful spiritual warriors. And then they would set this huge drama up of, fighting off all these demonic forces. But because they're a twin flame, they could do this special mission together of great importance. And they're ambassadors of this and that. And it's like, that's a con job. So there was a segment of some people who had gotten involved in channeling, and they were basically being played like a puppet in these drama myths and vampirizing their life force and just kind of throwing them into a tailspin of a self-importance on a special mission. So this is one of the tricks, I believe, that actually it's a higher level malevolent beings that can do this, and they don't necessarily appear bad. And this, in fact, was the case in two cases. One case in the Dark Side of Cupid, and it was called the Mariah and the Spirit Guide case. And in the Ted Rice case, which I mentioned before, he actually didn't find out until later. He did many hypnotic regressions with Barbara Bartholick, and she had the ability, and he had the ability to go deeper through screens. And some of these things were very traumatic to him and took many, many hours and many sessions. But one of the things that, clued me in, because I'm about like, I need to discern. I'm not going to be tricked because I know they're really good at trickery. So he was a natural psychic. Okay. And this was in the early days before he even knew anything about like aliens. And he was a natural medium and psychic and very good at it. And he would hang around with this spiritualist group. And at the time, he was actually still having abductions, but they would be covered in amnesia or maybe a nighttime event or a craft being seen, but he couldn't get the whole picture until he actually started getting the regressions with Barbie. But when he was in contact with these spiritualist groups who considered themselves, they were channelers or psychics or healers, they called themselves light workers in that time. When he would ask questions about, like, what were these beings that visited him at night, and that kind of that weird, that UFO thing, and when he could see through the wall and all this weird shit, which is classic abduction kind of stuff, they would always detract him from, oh, well, that's not really important. What's important is your spiritual work, what you're doing, and you should really do this. And there really are benevolent beings, because if they were bad, well, they would have done this already. So there was always a channeler or a light worker who supposedly was in contact with benevolent beings, but they always steer them away from finding out the truth of their experiences that had to do with like the real abductions. So we found out, long story short, that these reptilians were actually giving him a lot of information in some of his psychic readings, and that they were actually controlling many people and actually made deals with many people to give them healing abilities or channeling or working for them, and then getting positive kudos because they're working for the reptilians. But then they would steer away the information and the investigation of getting to the truth and what was really behind these alien beings and UFOs and these abductions and contacts. So we know now that many channelers and psychics, and I've learned this through the false twin flame and the alien love bite, that they could be going to a psychic who they're doing these angel card readings or the psychic readings or the tarot or channeling, and they find their twin flame, and they tell them, oh, you met your twin flame, you're doing the right thing, that's what you're supposed to do, you have a special mission. And it's a complete and utter con job of energy vampirization, and it like a nightmare. So we know that many psychics can be misled and they don't know it. And he was actually led by, before he knew the beings who were like manipulating him, they wanted him to write a book called The Light Worker. Okay, so we know now that they play games with trying to steer public opinion and spirituality and New Age circles or whatever belief systems to promote their agenda and hide what they're really doing. So, and I'm not saying that there aren't some benevolent beings, but the level at what some of these high-level dark ones come out as a false light can do is quite disconcerting. And the reason why, once we connect to our eternal original nature, we have all that we need to perceive clearly what's really happening, and a love for the truth beyond what we want to identify with. So it's kind of like a Buddhist quality, like in meditation, to be non-grasping of fear or desire and just, observe what presents itself with your intention towards absolute truth and the spirit of truth, and then things become revealed. So that's my work now, to really go at it with everything you've got to get through any barriers of deception.
So we are now kind of in the final days of, we're recording this kind of like just before the new year. So do you feel optimistic or pessimistic for 2024 in terms of where we're heading? People are talking about disclosure, that there's going to be some major disclosure events. So do you think this is going to be something positive or negative?
I guess it depends on how you perceive. Well, what happened to you when you came to understand what was really happening? And this kind of goes back to some of the sayings in the Nag Hammadi library, the Gnostic tractates, where, when you seek the truth with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and you will come to know what that is, and then you'll become, one of the terms was, you'll become disturbed, or that it'll be shocking. And then from that place of how you handle that and come to a greater understanding determines how you will be able to become sovereign to rule and then rest in what they call repose and peace. So I think we're at the place where we have to discover what the truth is, and it may be disturbing, just like when they say, oh, I had my awakening in 2020 or whatever, and then sometimes they say, well, I had the awakening through the love bite, and then I found out all this stuff, but it sent them on the journey of self-discovery and more truths about, for example, the New World Order agenda and all that kind of stuff. So it could be disturbing depending on your level of awareness and how you handle that information. So it depends on you. Like, if you already knew this yesterday, it's like you can kind of predict how others may respond and react depending on where they're at. But it's also my personal view. I go with what my spirit tells me, and my spirit tells me what I need to know to give me faith that it's going to be okay wherever I'm at in a few years' time. Everything's fine. Wherever I'm going is good. So wherever that timeline is, if there's another timeline or something, it's okay for me. It may be 5 years ahead, but it's good and it's fine. And I know everything worked out just fine. So that's how I see it.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, where do people go, Eve, to get your books or to learn more about what you've done in the past and what you plan to do?
Right now, my website of evelorgen.com or alienlovebite.com, that's still really where I do major postings. And also, I have an Alien Love Bite Telegram channel where I can post things more quickly. The only social media I have really is, I'm off Facebook. I got kicked off again. So I'm only doing Twitter and LinkedIn, and I need to add more social media. So right now, sorry to say, it's just my website and Telegram and Twitter, and I'm on other people's shows, so I tend to be on a lot of different shows. So that's the best way to contact me. Through my email directly is actually best. It's elorgen@gmail.com. So, and then the website has a contact form as well. So that's the best way. And I'm just working on a new healing modality. Well, it's actually a deepening of my understanding of complex trauma recovery, which is always about strengthening our sovereignty of eternal spirit embodied, which has to do with a new method of healing dissociative identity disorder from complex trauma that can be more effective than what maybe they did in the old days. So that's good news to me, but it's employing a spiritual approach, which is very effective. So that's my new place right now. No new books right now. So.
Well, I know you've helped thousands of people deal with traumas, deal with their abduction and these paranormal events. So thank you for all you've done. You've done great work, and I encourage people to visit your website, get your books, and learn more about your work.
Okay, thank you.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.